Imagine you're about to hit your financial independence number. Your portfolio is up 30%, and in the next few months, you're ready to pull the trigger on a FIRE journey you've been planning for years or even decades. Did you know, though, that there's a hidden risk that could drain your portfolio in the first decade? The good news is you're not helpless. With two simple things, checking the overall market valuation at the time of your retirement and changing your stock-bond ratio, you can mitigate this risk very successfully. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how. So hi, if you're new here, I'm Tyler from Stroll to Freedom. My wife Angie and I strolled to financial freedom in 6 years while globetrotting about half the year. And we're here to share the unfiltered truth about our journey. Hope it's helpful for you on your journey to freedom. Here's what we're going to go over today. First, I'm going to show you why the famous 4% rule could fail depending on when you retire. And then we'll break down the sequence of returns risk, which basically means when low returns very early in your retirement can destroy your plan, even if the market bounces back later. And then we'll look at the CAPE index, which is a simple tool for telling if stocks are considered expensive or cheap at the moment. And then the good news, I'll walk you through an equity glide path strategy that can help protect you from that sequence of returns risk. And let's break down sequence of returns risk with a very simple metaphor that'll hopefully illustrate it. So imagine that you have a jar of cookies that you need to last forever. And you eat some cookies every day because you need to live, but the jar magically makes new cookies based on how many cookies are currently in the jar. And if the jar loses a lot of cookies, say 15, 20, 30 years into your life, it'll be okay because you've already built up a lot of cookies in that early stage and you have enough to get through a 15% loss because you accidentally tipped it over and spilled some onto the floor. But if the jar loses cookies early, if you lose that 15, 20% of cookies because you accidentally tip it over very early in your life, in say the first 5 to 10 years, that's a much greater risk than losing it later because you haven't had time to build up from that magical property of the cookie. The cookie jar makes more cookies based on how many are in it. You haven't had time to build up enough to get you through and weather through that dip. So that's the key point. You need to be extra careful in the beginning. And then later, when the cookie jar is really full, you can relax and you can weather through some dips. And the equity glide path strategy we're going to talk about later, that's going to be the strategy that helps mitigate that risk of losing some cookies early in the beginning. And we want to make sure you always have enough cookies in your jar. And so over the past few years, the stock market has been seeing amazing returns, and they've pushed the market and individual portfolios to all-time highs. If you were lucky enough to be invested in equities during this run, your portfolio is probably looking really good right now. And if you've been working towards a FIRE number, you may have already reached it. There's a wrinkle here that makes it a little more complex and something that we have to be very aware of and careful of. It's that sequence of returns risk. And if you don't understand it, it can absolutely cripple your retirement plan. You've probably heard of the 4% rule, but if you haven't, and there's a study done that shows that if you have a total portfolio value that allows you to withdraw 4% annually to cover your expenses, that given historical market returns, your portfolio should outlast your spending needs. And that sounds perfect, right? So it's just as simple as that math. Figure out what your expenses are, your total portfolio value. Are your expenses 4% or less of that? And then you're good to go, right? But there's a problem. That 4% is simply an average. So on average, people that retire and withdraw 4% from their portfolio can indefinitely, withdraw it for very long time horizons. But Karsten, who writes the early retirement blog now, which is wonderful, I highly recommend you check it out. He has a really wonderful metaphor for it. So think about your drive to work. On average, that drive, it may be true that drive takes 30 minutes on average, taking 10 time points across the day. But if you kind of zoom in on a single time point, okay, if I leave at Saturday at 10 p.m., it's going to take me 15 minutes. But if I leave at Wednesday on 5 p.m., it's going to take me 45 minutes, right? So the average can be a very deceptive measure. Your actual experience of the trip to work depends tremendously on when you leave, right? The same principle applies to retirement. Your success probability is going to be highly dependent not only on how much you have in your portfolio, not only on how much your annual withdrawal is, but also on when you're retiring and the market conditions at that moment. So instead of giving the cookie metaphor, let's bring it kind of into the real world and explain what sequence of returns risk is. So imagine two people retire with the same amount of money. They have the same 4% withdrawal rate, but person A retires and the market has really healthy, nice returns of, 7, 8% over the next 10 years, and their portfolio builds builds to a large amount after those 10 years. And then even if in the next 20, 30 years, there's some significant downturns, it's already been built up so much in that first 10 from those nice, healthy returns that it's okay. But person B, on the other hand, they retire, and the very first 10 years, they have very bad returns, like 3%, 2%, even negligible. And then even if in the next 20, 30 years, the market returns to 7+ % returns, they've lost so much of that, of their basic capital from withdrawing 4% in those early years, that the then elevated returns later in decade 2, 3 isn't enough to bring them to retirement successfully. And so that's sequence of returns risk. To put it simply, if you're forced to withdraw early during periods of market downturn or suppressed returns, you can deplete your portfolio so much that even compound interest down the road won't be enough to save you. And it's those first 5 to 15 years of retirement when you're most valuable. Now you might be wondering, like, is there any way that we can know that we're at risk of this? Because this is a very serious thing, right? And then also, is there anything we can do to mitigate that risk? And yes. With the cookie metaphor, is there any way I can know that I'm at a higher risk of tipping of the jar? And that's where CAPE index enters into. So the CAPE index stands for cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio. All you just need to know is that it's a measure of the valuation of the market, how over or undervalued it is at the moment. And so be careful with this measure. Never use it as an indicator to time the market. Never try to time the market. Never take the CAPE index as like a short-term signal of like, oh, a market crash is imminent, I'm going to sell right now. The CAPE index is more of a mid to long-term indicator of what returns are going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years. And so right now, the good news is that the market's been going up a lot. So if you've been invested in equities, that's great. The bad news is if you're planning or hoping to start withdrawing from your portfolio in retirement soon, the CAPE index is astronomically high right now. So now more than ever, we need to take strategies to mitigate that sequence of returns risk. And the good news is there are strategies, and this is where the equity glide path glides into view. Again, going to shout out that early retirement blog by Karsten. There's a wonderful post where he runs multiple models on equity glide paths, and I highly recommend everyone read it. But I'm going to summarize it here for you now too and walk you through it and what we did personally based off this research and these models that Karsten ran. So in your wealth accumulation phase, especially if you're on the younger side, you're probably invested very aggressively, maybe close to, if not 100% equities, because you want to see those strong returns. But as you approach retirement in the 5 or so years leading up to it, you want to start shifting to an allocation of bonds that are going to be lower risk and a lot less volatile. The critical idea here is that you want that allocation of bonds to be large enough that it's going to get you through those first 5 to 10, maybe 15, but generally 5 to 10 years when you're at the highest risk of sequence of returns risk. So you're gradually shifting into bonds, and then you reach the peak allocation of bonds that you're targeting. It could be as low as 20%, and it could go up to 40%. So you'll reach that target allocation, and then you retire. In the sense, retirement, the definition is you're withdrawing from investments instead of using income to live, right? And so now you start withdrawing from those assets. You're only going to draw from the bonds initially. You never touch the equities in that first 5 to 10 year period. And so what's beautiful about this is no matter what the equities markets do, you're never going to be forced to draw from your share of equities that may have lost a lot of value in a downturn. And so in this process, this is the glide path. You glide into your peak bond allocation, you retire, and then you glide out of that peak bond allocation back into 100% equities. And so there are two components to that glide back to 100% equities. One is you're going to be withdrawing from bonds to live on, right? And that withdrawal will naturally tend to reduce the portion of bonds to equities, right? But that is a little too slow to bring it back to within 5 to 10 years, back to 100% equities. So the second component of it is you are actually also every month moving about 0.3 to 0.5% of your bonds back into equities. And in Karsten's models that he runs, he does all different variations between 0.2, 0.5%. So you can take a look at those graphs at what's best, where's the sweet spot. Generally speaking, it's around 0.2, 0.3%. Kind of depends on your overall allocations as well, whether it's 20/80 or 40/60. But that 0.2 or 0.3% transition of bonds back to stocks will accelerate that glide back into 100% equities. And Karsten modeled two approaches here. So one he dubbed a passive approach. And this means that you do that 0.2, 0.3% transition from bonds back to equities every month like clockwork, regardless of overall market conditions. And the other one he dubbed the active approach. And in this one, you do that shift from bond to equities only if equities are at an all-time high, almost certainly you're in an elevated CAPE index environment and you still have a sequence of returns risk looming. So you want to keep your chest of bonds for that. And so to sum it up, the active strategy almost always performed better than the passive one in all the models he ran. And so that's what we're personally doing. And so the results overall were great. In high CAPE environments like we're in today, the equity glide path strategy improved success rates quite dramatically compared to a simple static allocation. And if you found what I'm sharing helpful so far, please hit the like button and subscribe for more financial independence content and life after fire updates. And so for us personally, since we were forced into early retirement in an extremely elevated CAPE index environment that you have today, we've constructed a 20% bonds, 80% equity glide path allocation. As I mentioned before, we're going to be using that active strategy where we're only shifting from that extra little bit from bonds to equities when the market is not at an all-time high. And so is it perfect? No. I mean, no strategy is ever foolproof. And it is worth noting that while an equity glide path strategy did improve success rates, it's still not ideal. Like, it is still better to retire in a low CAPE index environment, but a lot of people, including us, don't necessarily have that luxury. And the equity glide path, it's a structured, evidence-based plan and strategy that helps one navigate the early dangerous phase of retirement. And so for us, that gives us a tremendous amount of peace of mind to have that strategy in place. I just want to drill home a major point of this video is if you're thinking about early retirement, if you're thinking about traditional retirement, make sure that you don't just think about the 4% rule. Make sure you think about sequence of returns risk, because it's really, really important. While an equity glide path, it might on the surface sound complicated, it's really not. And I hope in this video I showed you how you can put into place a strategy for yourself to help you navigate the early stages of retirement while still participating in future market growth. And so I've linked Karsten's blog post about it below. It's a bit dense, but I'd highly recommend it to go even more into detail. And what's your retirement strategy? Have you already been thinking about sequence of returns risk? Do you have a different strategy that you're using to mitigate it? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. If this video helped you understand a typical retirement concept and you'd like to learn step by step how we set up our finances on the day that we were forced to retire early, check out this video. And I'll see you in the next one. Keep strolling to freedom.